articulately, it decays very quickly into good advice. And good advice is remembered as like little quippy sayings, even at best as aphorisms, but the wisdom is gone. Other inarticulate presentations of high wisdom just sound confusing. And they sound like music that's played out of key. You can tell that there must be music there, but that this particular rendition is out of key. Or that the instrument is ill-tuned. The Tao Te Ching is very high wisdom, and most of the translations have reduced it down to little kitchen homiletic good advice, which nobody pays much attention to. Or occasionally, if someone gets into reading the Tao Te Ching in the right spirit, you read between the lines and you're impressed that something deep is being said, but you can't quite tell what. So my translation is to present in the English language the flavor and the spirit of the high wisdom of the ancient Chinese. I am trying to be a voice for Lao Tzu in the English language some 2,500 years after his time. We're taking the first, as our first section, all of the chapters of the Tao Te Ching that have to do with Te. And then we're going to take the chapters that have to do with Tao. Now all the chapters that have to do with Te have a very meaningful structure to them. And the 4 chapters that we're taking tonight are in the exact center, they're like a square, at the exact center of all the chapters on the Te. There are as many chapters before this square as there are after, an equal number. To the archaic Chinese, the square was what we would recognize today as the circle. We see the circle as indicative of something precise and accurate and complete and full. But to the ancient Chinese, when something is squared, it is presented exactly in its fullness. There's a Chinese Taoist phrase that runs like this: when you meet a Taoist master who is already a Shen, the pupils of his eye will be square. And of course you can take this in sort of a homey way, that if you've never seen anybody with square pupils, or you can take it in a deeper allegorical way, where Ming Dynasty, 17th century Taoism, talked about the small spiritual person that's in the square inch of the heart. And so if one looks clear through the transparent pupils to see in the square inch of the heart the real person, that's another way of understanding it. But to the ancient Taoist, in the Zhou dynasty, like Lao Tzu, the understanding was that one learns to see in terms of the square. One learns to see that pairedness is the deepest root of this world, and that the balance of pairedness is a pair of pairs, and from that square. So it's like an architectural eye that one develops. You learn to see the structure of life. The square has a very interesting kind of a tone. Once you condition the eye, once you train yourself, like the great Italian filmmaker Michelangelo Antonioni, he used to carry a blank 35 millimeter slide around. No slide, just the frame. And he would hold it up, and he would look at things through this square. He was constantly training his eye to see in terms of what the camera eye would focus on. And in this way, if you see an Antonioni film, you can see it with an almost Taoist-like clarity. You can see something like in his classic film Blow Up, about a photographer investigating a crime, who trains himself to see exactly what is there, only what is there. And the problem, later on, is to bring that quality of thusness into one's play of life with others who do not experience that thusness. So you can become extremely refined, but when you come into contact with people who are not refined, the meeting is clumsy, or it's misappropriated. And so very often later on, Taoists lived alone. This square of the 4 chapters, 58, 59, 60, 61, is the square in the middle of the discussion of Te. It's the way in which to see Te in its primordial grouped structure. Now the translation of chapter 58 is one of the most bedeviled chapters. I brought 5 different translations over here. 5 of the best translations of the Tao Te Ching. We're not using slovenly examples. There are dozens of those, maybe scores of those. But here, 5 of the best. Let me just present to you the beginning, just the beginning few lines, in 5 different translations. And you can get the sense right away that there is a confusion here about what is being said. First translation, done by a Chinese man, named Wu, John C.H. Wu, and he is very elegant, was a very elegant man, quite extraordinary. And John C.H. Wu translates the beginning of chapter 58 in this way. Where the ruler is mum, the people are simple and happy. Now, that's not very easy to comport to. Where the ruler is mum, the people are simple and happy. Second line, where the ruler is sharp, the people are wily and discontented. Now if we go to another Chinese translation, Chu Ta Kao, which was made for the Buddhist Society in London about 50 years ago, here's his translation of those same beginning lines. When the government is blunt and inactive, the people will be happy and prosperous. Now it sounds like double talk. When the government is discriminative, the people will be dissatisfied and restless. Now you can't go very far with language like that. Let's come to a modern American translation. Victor Mayer, who's a very good scholar, very excellent scholar, published by Bantam Books. Here's his first few lines. When government is anarchic, the people are honest. When government is meddlesome, the state is lacking. We're back to fortune cookie land. We're not going to go very far with this kind of language. And it simply isn't Lao Tzu. Let's come to another Chinese translation. This one is Cheng Sheng Yuan. And here's how he translates those same beginnings of chapter 58. When the country is governed through simplicity and leniency, the people are genuine and honest. When the country is governed through harshness and sharp investigation, the people are more deceitful and dishonest. Now, it's like a third-rate candidate making a political speech. It's very nice, but it doesn't really grab you, and it doesn't really go anywhere, and it is not high wisdom. And it misses Lao Tzu by whole gulfs and whole levels of order. The fifth translation, also Wing Sit Chan by a Chinese. I brought 4 Chinese and a great Western scholar. These are all people who can read Chinese very, very well, but they cannot translate Lao Tzu at all. With your pardon and your permission, they simply don't have the mind. I'm not saying that they lack the IQ. That's certainly not the case. They don't have Lao Tzu's mind. Why is this so? Largely because the Chinese academics of the 20th century have Japanese minds, and they are trained in imitation because Japanese minds always need something to copy. They're very rarely original. And the Japanese minds in the 20th century copied Europeans. And the Europeans copied the earlier Europeans, who were largely Jesuits and trained religious figures in a different tone. And what made sense to those trained religious figures in the original European encounter with China was Confucian thought, and not even classical Confucian thought, but the revival of Confucian thought in the Sung dynasty called Neo-Confucianism. And not only the revival of Neo-Confucianism, but the Ming revival of the revival in the 17th century. And so, almost all of the translators, even though they are Chinese, simply do not have the mind. They cannot speak Lao Tzu. Wing Sit Chan begins the same Chinese characters with this translation. When the government is non-discriminative and dull, the people are contented and generous. When the government is searching and discriminative, the people are disappointed and contentious. Now, none of these translations are going to do. None of them carry the quality which is there in Lao Tzu, which is that of very high wisdom. If you were to count on one hand the great geniuses of the world, you might include Zoroaster, Pythagoras, Plotinus, Lao Tzu, perhaps Jesus and Buddha. And that might be it for the very first level of high wisdom mentality. Here is the way in which I've translated this for you to present in English the way Lao Tzu speaks in Chinese. Now, chapter 58 bears the title, Tuning into Change. Tuning into Change. You can pass this over to chapter 58, Tuning into Change. Now, the first character that appears in chapter 58 is Qi, but pronounced not like Qi, like energy, but Qi. And this conveys the word which best translate as itself. Itself. And it occurs all the time in Lao Tzu. We've been translating it as itself. What is itself? Something that is in a phase of expression where the complete exactness of what it is occurring. That's when something is itself. It's not beginning, it's not ending, it's not increasing, it's not declining, but it is itself. What is itself? The balance of the inner person, called Jen, human-heartedness. When it is full, when it is itself, then it is Jen. And Lao Tzu can use the term itself and refer to Jen in its fullness. Also, Te, in its fullness, is an itself. Also, Tao, in its fullness, is an itself. So that here we have Tao in itself, Te in itself, Jen in itself. Now we've been concentrating on how there is a development, there is a movement, there is an energy cycle, where these are phases that give way to each other. Now tonight, for the first time, we need to look at this from the interval standpoint. That is to say, if you look at music, you can look at the notes, or you can turn around and look at the intervals. It is still the same music, and it is still a musical structure. When you put the intervals and the notes together, as you must in a performance, then you have the living music itself. Then the music occurs. If you know the notes, but you don't know the correct intervaling, you will play it wrong. If you know the correct intervaling, but have no notes, there is nothing to say. When you put them together, that's when you have it. Now, we've talked about the five-phase energy cycle, the way in which Tao becomes Te, becomes Jen, and goes on, becomes Yi, and becomes Li. Now we have to consider the first three, and we'll consider the other two later on. But the first three, Tao, Te, and Jen, as wholenesses that occur in themselves, so that the character, which means Chi, can refer to Tao in itself, can refer to Te in itself, can refer to Jen in itself. And in a way, by using this kind of pronoun, instead of being ambiguous, Lao Tzu is ambidextrous. When he has the character, the Chinese character, Qi, itself, it can refer simultaneously to Jen, Te, Tao, or to all three. And this is holding, as they say in later Taoist meditation techniques, holding the three ones. I brought that little monogram from the Scandinavian Publishing University from Stockholm. The method of holding the three ones. Those who are in the Saturday class, and most of you are, recognize here that we're talking about, and Lao Tzu is talking about, an ordinal matrix of presence, and not a cardinal line of development. And why is he talking about an ordinal matrix? Why do the three ones, Tao, Te, and Jen, why do they exist in and of themselves and yet can exchange with each other, leaving no trace? Because an ordinal matrix moves by transformation, whereas a cardinal line moves by causality. One has to cause two. Two has to cause three. But not in Taoism. In Taoism, especially, the transition from the more clumsy causal cardinal line to the transformative ordinal matrix, the transformative grammar that goes into that is the whole series of correspondences. So that in the Tao Te Ching, correspondences what vibrates with what else, what resonates with what else. If you ring this bell here, the glass in the window will resonate with it, but the walls will not. When Tao vibrates, Te does not resonate. Gen resonates. When Te resonates, neither Tao nor Gen resonate, but E, the symbols, resonate. So that every other, in what would be a cardinal line, resonate. And in this, you get what I call, what I've named grandfather phasing, or if you like, grandmother phasing, every other one. Now when you get to the last, when you get to the fifth, the first Tao resonates with Gen in the middle, and that resonates with Li, the 10,000 things. So the Tao, the spiritual human, and the world all resonate together. Alright, the Te and the symbols resonate together, but moving to the grandfather phasing, what would come after the last, the fifth phase? Well, it would be Tao again. So in a way, Te and E and Tao resonate, and that's how Te comes to resonate finally again through Tao with Gen. So that what I'm trying to present to you is that there's no clumsy causality in Taoism whatsoever. Not any whatsoever. The whole basis of Chinese mysticism, of Chinese poetry, of Chinese art, of Chinese science, of the Chinese personality, of the Chinese civilization, the whole East Asian understanding of reality is based on resonant correspondences. And when all of the correspondences are resonant together, then that consonance is harmony. That consonance is harmony. Now in this little scenario, and all this comes from the first character, Ching itself. The first character is itself. The second character translates as administration. Itself's administration. Subtle, subtle. In other words, you can't take it on a causal, clumsy initial basis. And you have to go further than just a kind of a transformational grammar that allows you to go to a more subtle basis. You have to go to the subtle basis itself. Lao Tzu uses the same character, which I've translated as subtle, twice in a row. D.T. Suzuki called it unostentatious. John C.H. Wu called it monk. It's not monk. It's not unostentatious. It's subtle, repeated twice, because he is showing here that one needs to sink exponentially into the mystery of what's going on. That the penetration needs to go not only under the surface, but under the surface of what's under the surface. But we can take the surface and the twice removed subtle together because they will resonate together. So that in Taoism, the appearance is extremely valuable, not for clumsily what it is, but for what it is in its resonance with something doubly mysterious. So that in Taoism, the Chinese are extremely basic and natural. You never find the Chinese getting strung out on abstraction. But they are always using the seemingly natural in a very doubly subtle way. Grandfather facing. Okay, let's have the translation and let's see how it reads. Let's come back to John C.H. Wu for just a minute as a contrast. Where the ruler is mum, mum, the people are simple and happy. Where the ruler is sharp, sharp, the people are wily and discontented. Now, Lao Tzu speaks this way, and if he were speaking English, I believe he would speak as this translation is. It's self-administration, subtle, subtle. It's self-people, simple, simple. It's administration, prying, prying. It's people grasping, grasping. Misery, and then the Chinese character for an exhaling exclamation like ah. Misery, ah. Now there's a contrast here. The first two lines are about how itself, in this matrix of resonance, when it's subtle, people's simplicity is deep like the subtlety, and they go together. They resonate together. So that simple people and sages get along really well. The saying in the 1930s in America was that eggheads and truck drivers always get along. Because they somehow recognize that though there's a distance between them, they both have come to the same conclusion about life, that it's interesting. Whereas the jaded people who are not interested are in between. They don't care for the truck drivers nor the eggheads. Well, this is the way Lao Tzu, this is the way the Chinese Taoist mind is. It's very homey, very basic, and yet at the very same time, it's doubly profound. So he's saying, when itself's working, when it's administrating, double subtlety is operating. Exponential subtlety. And when that's happening, the people's lives are very simple, very fulfilling and very simple. But when the itself, when its own balanced presence is masked by a neutered it's, then that administration is always trying to fill in, because of its neutered incomprehension, trying to fill in what it's missing by prying into people what they're doing, into their lives. And by doing this, the people in response to this continual prying and investigation develop a lot of cleverness, and they're always grasping to get an advantage out of that. So in the Chinese characters of chapter 58, Lao Tzu is comparing an itself in its ordinal transformative thusness with a neutered it's, which doesn't have any comprehension and thus has to always check up on people. So the it's is a kind of a bureaucratic paradise where you're constantly being checked on and double checked. An IRS heaven. Whereas the itself is the grandeur of the way nature actually operates, in which spirit actually operates. Lao Tzu is saying here, the chapter's title is Tuning into Change. Tuning into change. In other words, not tuning into the station, or any positions, or any things, but tuning into the change, the transformative relationalities that are going on. Itself's administration, subtle, subtle. Itself's people, simple, simple. Its administration, prying, prying. Its people, grasping, grasping. Misery, ah. Harmony, its phases support harmony. Ah, misery, its phases happen on who knows its limits. It never ceases. So that what causes misery in this world is the lack of a pivotal presence which is at home anywhere. And because it's not at home anywhere, it's always trying to secure its nest by arranging people and arranging events and arranging situations according to a plan that it thinks is going to give it security. What we need is more law and order. And of course, everything unravels and falls apart because nothing works that way. We don't work that way. A country doesn't work that way. A village doesn't work that way. A family doesn't work that way. Nature doesn't work that way. Nothing works that way. When there's a petty tyrant trying to always maneuver things so that it fits their plan, you put something down, they move a little bit. It's the wrong place. You say something, it wasn't quite right. You do something, why did you do that? This constant nitpicking, that's the misery that Ramsa is talking about here. It's out of phase with anything that could have resonance and correspondence line up and produce the wholeness of the cycle of harmony. Who knows? Its misery, its phases happen on who knows its limits. It never ceases. Quicksand. And then his characters express this kind of language. Natural happening acts unnatural. Aspiring happening acts unpropitious. Gen itself's confusion. It's daily, assuredly long. Now I could change the translation here from daily to day. The sense is that when you're unhappy, the day is interminably long. And you don't look forward to the next day because it's also going to be interminably long. There are no days that are not interminably long. And so one inculcates in oneself purposely. It's like a self-sabotage just to survive. A kind of a blurring of the edges so that you don't really pay attention to what's going on. And so days then scoot by extremely fast, which is the underside and just as destructive as days that are interminably long. Those two go together. He's saying here, when natural happening acts unnatural, when aspiring happening acts unpropitious, Gen itself is confused. Now what does Gen do? Gen is the inner sense of balance. It's even deeper than balance. If I hold my arms out, I have a balance here. But I'm sitting in a chair. If I were standing, my balance would need to be more acute. If I were standing on one foot, it would need to be more acute. If I were standing on a skate blade on one foot, on a high wire, 1,000 feet above Black Rock Canyon, I would have to be really exact about my balance. So Lao Tzu is saying that Gen, when it tunes its balance finer and finer, comes into a transformation out of the simple into the subtle. And when we realize that the simple and the subtle are resonant with each other, the subtle gains a great respect for the simple life. The simple life doesn't look naive. It looks very, very good. And the subtle looks very, very good because it has a consonance with it. Lao Tzu always uses a term. He uses Jen when we're talking about our balance sitting or standing on one foot. But when we make it ever more so exact, where life itself is precarious, then Jen deepens into spiritual Jen. He then uses a term, Zi Jen, which means assuredly so, or thusness itself. It later became the term that was used in Chan Buddhism and used in Zen for that which wakes up, that which comes alert, that inner quality, which is balance at first, which when it deepens is equanimity, and when it deepens from that is tranquility. And when it turns into spiritual gem is nirvana. So it's this quality here that he's speaking about. Therefore, spiritual gem squares, but not injures, angles, but not hurts, sharp, but not strict, shiny, but not glossy. Now notice the four. Spiritual gem, and we talked about the square before. Remember now that this whole chapter, 58, is the first of four chapters that form a square. 58, 59, 60, 61. They are the four chapters that are in the very middle of the discussion on Te. There are as many chapters before these four as there are after these four, and that's the whole discussion on Te. So that chapter 58 begins the square in the middle of the discussion on Te that presents exactly what the whole foundation, what the pivotal seeing structure would be. And so the beginning of chapter 58 is like you're trying to put the needle on the record. Remember when we used to have records and not CDs? You had to get the needle just right, because when it gets on the beginning, it'll play all the way through. Because the record grooves are in a spiral, very tightly wound spiral. If you get it at the right beginning, it will play all the way through. Lao Tzu is saying, spiritual gem always puts our presence on the very point where existence is real. And if we just leave it alone, wu wei, it will play out exactly what is appropriate to what really exists, what's really happening. But there's a mystery here. The mystery is this. We do not have all the information in terms of data, in terms of facts, in terms of perspectives about what is totally real at this moment. But spiritual gem does. So that very often a Taoist will do things that seem inconceivable even to themselves. They will not know exactly the reason why they did something, though sometimes it seems ridiculous. Sometimes you catch yourself just playing around like a child. And it turns out later on that that's exactly what was real at that moment. Sometimes there's great virtue in just saying, fed up to somebody who's gone too far. Not that you're fed up, but the saying of it exactly at the right moment to someone who needed to hear that might be the Tao of the moment. So that Chuang-Tzu has a little phrase, joy and anger occurring as naturally as the four seasons. There's the square. We talked about the square. Chapter 58 is the beginning of the square at the center of Te. And at the end of the first chapter about the square of Te, Lao Tzu gives us the square in this language. Therefore, spiritual Jen squares but not injures. Squares but not injures. When spiritual Jen works, it doesn't have to shave somebody down to size or exclude some events. Spiritual Jen squares but not injures, brings everything into the right play. One great example of this, I'll just give you this as a little vignette, because it's important to understand this. It's important to visualize this. When he was young, when he was about 19, Manly Hall went out to the Morongo Indian Reservation. This was in the time just after the First World War. And he was trying to learn archery from the Morongo Indians. And he was trying, like a good New York City boy, to hit the target by aiming the arrow. And finally, some old man came up to him and said, "You've got it all wrong. You don't shoot the arrow from the bow up here. We shoot from the hip, and we don't aim." And so the first question is, well, how do you ever hit the target? And the old man's reply is, how do you never not hit the target? And after a while, Manly learned to shoot a bow and arrow and hit the target every time from the hip. This is spiritual Jen, which takes not only the arrow and the eye, but the target into the same matrix. The target is in the same resonance as the arrow. You could never miss. This is the way God does. Everything is in the same matrix. So whenever anything happens, it is consonant with all. So there's never piecework anywhere. Now, if you're looking at the piecework as evidence to try and build up to the all, it'll take you exactly as much time as it takes the universe to exist, to fit all the pieces together. You can do it that way if you want to, but it isn't necessary. You can shoot from the hip with a spiritual frame of mind and never miss. Therefore, spiritual Jen squares but not injures, angles but not hurts, sharp but not straight, shining but not glossy. Let's take a little bit of a break here, because this is strenuous, and then we'll come back to this. Chapter 59 is entitled Keeping Down. Now let's try our little rule of thumb here. Every other element in a Taoist sequence has a corresponding quality. So if chapter 58 is called Tuning into Change, what is chapter 60 called? Chapter 60 is called Maintaining Phase. Can you see how they're corresponding? All right, if chapter 59 is called Keeping Down, what is chapter 61? Humility's Te. Keeping Down, Humility's Te. Tuning into Change, Maintaining Phase. So that there's always this kind of a sense in Taoism, and the sense is this and that, yin and yang. But it's not yin and yang in a polarity. That's a total misconception. To conceive of yin and yang as polarities is just stupid. The only time that yin and yang are polarities is at the split second where a precise focus of manifest action becomes physical and substantial. And it lasts for a split second. How split? Like a nanosecond, picosecond. It's the only time when polarity exists, just for a split second. And then, because polarity is an unstable tension, the real slips back into its complementation of yin and yang together. Now that whole insight is the principle of, say, karate. You don't hit a wall. You hit so that you just touch the wall in 1 nanosecond where there is a polarity, and the wall cannot stand that. It's the whole thing in a samurai swordsman in a Kurosawa movie. He doesn't think of slicing up the opponent. He never thinks of the opponent at all. He moves, if he's Toshiro Mifune, under excellent direction, in such a way that the sword only touches the other person in 1 split second when a polarity between the body and the sword is established, and the sword will cut. The whole East Asia sense of the real is all based on this. Everything, the whole civilization is based on this. That polarity, real polarity between yin and yang, is extremely rare and extremely unstable, and is only usable as like one of those contact points for just a split second, so that manifest physicality can be touched by the real. Other than that, everything is always in this complementation. So it's better to live by complementarity and use polarity sparingly, rather than to live in a world of tensions of polarity and never even know about complementation. So here, in Keeping Down, chapter 59, let's try my translation first, and then we'll go to the other 5 and just get the beginning line. Governing gem, attending heaven. No one jeopardies justness. Now consider justness. This is called early training. Just like when you raise a child, there's such a thing as early training. Everybody who's ever raised a baby knows that there's a certain potty training that you have to get done. It's a part of early training. That food is better in the mouth than on the wall, part of early training. That it's better not to touch some match burning. All of this is under the aegis of early training, ABCs, basics to get you around so that you could survive from one room to the next, from 1 hour to the next. Governing gem, attending heaven. No one jeopardies justice. Now consider justice. This is called early training. Early training is called compacting te. Compacting te, then the not busy is not overcome or not overwhelmed. The not busy, not overcome, then no one knows it's limiting. When no one knows it's limiting, one thereby extends to the country. Extending to the country, itself's mother can thereby be lasting, enduring. This is called deep roots, sturdy stem. Long life, enduring insight is Tao. Now let's try John C.H. Wu. In governing a people and in serving heaven, there is nothing like frugality. To be frugal is to return before straying. To return before straying is to have a double reserve of virtue. To have a double reserve of virtue is to overcome everything. To overcome everything is to reach an invisible height. Only he who has reached an invisible height can have a kingdom. Only he who has got the mother of a kingdom can last long. This is the way to be deep-rooted and firm planted in the Tao, the secret of long life and lasting vision. Now that's like a little religious tract that you would hand out to somebody and hope they're going to stay in the tent. It's not Lao Tzu. Let's try Victor Mayer. To rule men and serve heaven, there is nothing like thrift. Now, only through thrift can one be prepared. Being prepared means having a heavy store of integrity. With a heavy store of integrity, you can overcome everything. Able to overcome everything, no one knows his limits. If no one knows his limits, he can have the kingdom. Having the mother of the kingdom, he can long endure. Sounds somewhat risque. This is called sinking roots, firm and deep, the way of long life and lasting vision. No, it won't do. It won't do. The other translations are similar, in that they won't do. Now, my language is like Lao Tzu's language. It takes getting used to. You have to sit with it. You have to not just let it bounce off your ear, but you have to bring your intelligence into play in a resonant way and follow the sinuous discourse of the meaningfulness of the language. And if you can follow it seamlessly, so that all the language moves like one of Oral Hershiser's great knuckleballs. The whole trajectory is just one, but the movement along the trajectory is extremely subtle. And only a really good hitter can connect to that pitch. 59 again, keeping down. Governing Jinn, attending heaven. No one jeopardies justice. Now consider justness. This is called early training. Early training is called compacting te. Compacting te, then the not busy, not overcome. Not busy, not overcome, then no one knows it's limiting. When no one knows it's limiting, one thereby extends to the country. That is to say, a single person whose Jinn has deepened to spiritual Jinn, who is in phase with Tao, can do anything in the world without any effort. It's like the single right person can bring the health of a whole country back. That a single spiritual person is of unimaginable efficacy. Trying to stay away from the word power. It doesn't take a lot, it doesn't take an elite, it doesn't take a miraculous few, it doesn't take more money than the other people. All it takes is one. One spiritual person can bring a whole country into concept. So Lao Tzu is saying, when no one knows it's limiting, one thereby extends to the country. Extending to the country, itself's mother can thereby be lasting and enduring. Earlier in the Te Tao Ching, earlier in the discussion of the Te, he's talking about how life is really very secure when the mother has cared for the son, and the son in his turn cares for the mother. Life under those conditions is very secure. No one worries about being too young, and no one worries about being too old. He's saying here that in this kind of spiritual gem, where someone has extended to the whole country, and there are times in history when it takes just one, because everything else is computer. Extending to the country, itself's mother can thereby be lasting, enduring. This is called deep roots sturdy stem. It's like a little phrase that you would find on Miracle Grow, not for plants, but for people. You add a little bit of this magic stuff to somebody's life, they will develop deep roots in a sturdy stem. They will be the kind of human being who can last it out and who can go as deep as need be in any situation. Not every situation needs profundity, but if they have a situation that requires it, they can be there. Or they can live with the natural surface and be constant with it, if that's all that's required. Very often in life, you don't have to have very much. You get through the day very easily. But you have to have the capacity, when it's needed, to go as deep as the real. Now that's freedom. So Lao Tzu says, this is called deep roots, sturdy stem, long life, enduring insight. It's Tao. Chapter 60, maintaining phase. That is to say, maintain a strategic sense of what you are resonant with. In a clumsy way, the unintelligent think that they have their thoughts, that their thoughts are in their mind. Their mind is this kind of a box inside, and their thoughts are in that mind. Until they try to control their thoughts, and they find that they don't have very much control over their thoughts, quite frequently. And the more that they learn about controlling thoughts, the more difficult it is to control thoughts. And finally, when you get really deep into the whole problem of how you control thoughts, you realize that if you calm the body, the thoughts get clear. Whereas if you try to calm the mind, the thoughts get more unclear. So if the thoughts have a resonance with the body, that's why all yogas that really work show you asanas, postures of the body. That the thoughts clear up. Because the te and the e, they resonate together. So that the thoughts are not in the mind. The thoughts are of themselves and are resonant with the body, which usually is what te is in our experience. The mind resonates with the world. So that when the mind is brought into conscious resonance with the world, the mind works very well. And when the world is calm, the mind is calm. So that when you go into a forest or into a mountain scene where nature is ordered, you find that your mind problems sort of vanish. The mind works much better. So that the body and the world are linked together through this kind of pair of pairs. That's the square. The mind and the world, the body and the thoughts. And they come together and make that square. And when they're there, in that square, when they have their mutual correspondences set up and they are resonant together and they are all in harmony together, Tao is there in the whole. Then Tao is there. When you first get experience in this, the quality is that you begin to sense a situation where the Tao is collecting. And you see something in nature where the Tao is beginning to work there. You see a favorite tree, or you see an arrangement of a rock and some grass. It can be anything. This is why Chinese always have these beautiful planters with the little figures and little stones and the plants in there. They're like tabletop gardens. They aren't just flower pots that have a flower in, but they have a composition in them. Because they're setting up some kind of occurrence in the world can be very small, where the mind can begin to have its consonance with that world. And then when you bring your body into consonance with your thoughts, the Tao can collect because the things are brought together. It's the whole principle of making a landscape painting. A landscape painting will do what the tabletop garden will do. It means that nature does not have to exist in the expanse of a John Muir trail on the high Sierras. You don't need 250 miles of wilderness. All you need is just a little bit. John Blofield, when he was in Beijing, in the 1930s, went to the White Cloud Monastery north out in the Western Hills. And when the old Taoists there realized that he was really interested, he's not just a tourist, they called him in out of the garden where there are all these weird shaped rocks and rare plants and things, strange birds. And they called him in out of the garden to show him a nice little tabletop garden that was inside one of the meditation rooms. And after he appreciated that for a while, one old Taoist called him in and opened this drawer and showed him a garden on a little thumbnail. So that Taoism becomes extremely refined in that it's almost like scientific equipment now. If you know what to look for and how to look, all you need is a single photon, and you can establish the clarity of the mind. If you could see with enough exactness to see a single photon of light, that's all that you would need to clear and harmonize, to resonantly, correspondently balance the mind. One photon of light. So that you can see that it is the most common, enlightenment is the most common thing in the universe. Because there are trillions and trillions of photons just from a single light bulb. So that the real is not rare, but it is overwhelmingly the case. It's the exceptions, like the moment of polarity, where a being would not understand, like a confused human being, which is extremely rare, unbelievably rare. But it's like the lost sheep principle of Jesus. As long as there is somebody not participating in the real, it's of concern to everyone. Here's keeping down one last time, chapter 59, and then I'll go to chapter 60, maintaining faith. Governing Gen, attending heaven, no one jeopardies justness. Now consider justness. This is called early training. Early training is called compacting te. Compacting te, then the not busy, not overcome. Not busy, not overcome, then no one knows it's limiting. When no one knows it's limiting, one thereby extends to the country. Extending to the country, itself's mother can thereby be lasting, enduring. This is called deep roots, sturdy stem. Long life, enduring insight, gets down. Chapter 60, maintaining phase. Govern a great country as if fried small fish. Now, maybe you haven't recently fried small fish. You have to be very careful when you're frying small fish. Because they're going to have little tiny bones. You want to make sure that you fry them in such a way that the flesh is going to come off those little tiny bones. You want to burn them. You don't want to underdo them. It's a way of being clear about exactness in a very homely way. Govern a great country as if frying small fish, with Tao principling the whole country, its ghosts not haunt. Not only its ghosts not haunt, its powers not harm Jen. Not only its powers not harm Jen, spirit Jen also not harm Jen. Since both not mutually harm, thereby Te unitly returns there. So I'm speaking English in a Lao Tzu kind of syntax. It's as difficult to read this English as it is to read Lao Tzu's Chinese, but that's the whole point. One has to deepen, one has to be attentive, one has to be amplified, and if we can do this in English, we can understand Lao Tzu in his own language, even though we're reading English. That's why I'm doing this translation. So at least that possibility is there. One of the worst things is to have the ghosts of a situation haunting, especially in a political sense. Another is that there are real powers that are engendered in situations, and it's the pressures of those powers that very often can injure the integrity of the person. Money is such a power. Fame is such a power. Glamour is such a power. And there are many of them. And if not handled right, we scrape and bruise pretty easily with those kinds of powers. But there's a kicker in here. The kicker is this. Not only its powers not harm Jen, spirit Jen also not harm Jen. Because when our worldly person is misbehaving, our own spirit takes an adversarial position against us. When we mess around, we are the cause of confusion that has its reverberation in the universe, and the spirit Gen, which is a part of the universal matrix, singles us out as just like an antibody in the immune system singles out an intruder, an invader, a foreign object. If you put some foreign cell into the bloodstream, it'll be attacked by phagocytes right away. Spirit Gen will attack our ego if it is causing imbalance and chaos in the universe. And can do a great deal of harm. Great deal of harm. Not only its powers not harm Gen, spirit Gen also not harm Gen, since both not mutually harm, thereby Te unitly returns there. Now, you can translate Te as virtue, and you can understand it in kind of a moral sense. You can understand Te as power, and you can understand it as an energized sense. But what Lao Tzu is saying here is that when our mass, our ego mass, is in consonance with our spiritual person, when they're in consonance together, then Te occurs with both of them working together. Then Te is there in us. Te is also there. Chapter 61 then is called Humility's Te. Humility's Te. Let's try the first line of Chu Ta Kao's 61. A great state is the world's low stream to which all the river flows down, the world's field and the world's female. No, that's kind of confusing. A great state is the world's low stream to which all the river flows down, the world's field and the world's female. I'm not so sure that that's not an insult. Let's try chapter 61. Just the first lines by John Wu. A great country is like the lowland towards which all streams flow. It is the reservoir of all under heaven, the feminine of the world. A little bit better, but it's still on the homily side. You can see that it's not quite it. It's not Lao Tzu, that's for sure. What does it chant? A big country may be compared to the lower part of a river. It is the converging point of the world. It is the female of the world. Well, now they're trying to get at something, but obviously they're trying forks on ice cream. It's just not working. Here's 61, Victor Nair. I don't wish to denigrate any of these gentlemen. I'm just showing you how difficult it is to translate Lao Tzu when you don't think like Lao Tzu. When you think like a Neo-Confucian, a revivalist Neo-Confucian academic with Japanese outlook, you're a long, long way from Lao Tzu. This is the translation that just came out from Bantam Books. A large state is like a low-lying estuary, the female of all under heaven. Well, let's try one more. Maybe chapter 61. Chongyang. A greater nation must be humble and like a reservoir where all the waters join together. It is the passivity of the universe. Here's how I've translated chapter 61, Humility's Tale. A great country that onwards flows to the whole country itself's union, the whole country itself's life. The feminine, always by quietude, conquers the masculine. By quietude makes moderating. Thus, a great country, by moderating to small countries, actually conquers small countries. Small countries, by moderating to great countries, actually conquer a great country. Therefore, some stoop to conquer, others moderate and conquer. A great country wishes no more than to unite, feed its persons. Small countries wish no more than to represent, serve its persons. Now both of these, each te, they which wish, a great one must make moderation. So we've come to our square, 58, 59, 60, 61. The square began with itself's administration, subtle, and it ends with the saying about great countries and small countries, how when they practice moderation with each other, they conquer each other, and in doing so, create te. More next week.